Designing a custom home is never a smooth, linear process. Each project, each home, each family, they all have their own unique challenges that need to be overcome. Sometimes a design comes together pretty quickly and we can roll right through the design into construction drawings and we're building the home before we know it. Other times the design process can get dragged on for years. Sometimes a project goes on hold and the client will re-engage a year, 2, 3 years later. Other times a project just simply ends for one reason or another. And so is the case for this Cape Cod beach house that we were working through the design on. About a year ago, the homeowner approached me and let me know that while they liked the way that the design was progressing, they have decided to not purchase the property and instead they are going to move to a different part of the country. And so, unfortunately, the project ends. But I really did like the direction that we were going in with this design. I was really excited about what we were creating. And for this past year, I've been thinking about this project and it has been on my mind like an incomplete thought. So I decided, why not just finish the schematic design? I can take you through the direction that we were going in and I can complete the design work and show what that process would have looked like. And hopefully you'll gain something from this. Right before the project stopped, the homeowner and I were talking that the house might have been getting a little bit too large. In those early conceptual stages, we were designing and thinking of the house being able to accommodate all the guests that the homeowner intended to have at a single time. And the reality is while that's a possibility, while there would be a possibility where she would have her daughter and her granddaughter there at the same time as she would have other guests, the reality is 90% of the time, 95% of the time, it would probably be just her or just her and one guest. So we were talking about not letting the square footage get too bloated, right? We didn't want to have all this space that wasn't going to be used except for maybe a few times a year. One of the things I really liked about this home is how we were using separate volumes that were attached with these connector pieces. Now, having these separate volumes is having a moment right now in modern home design. It seems like everyone's doing that. And I really like the look of that with these simple forms that are sort of detached and pulled away from each other. But for many projects, that design move or design gesture could be arbitrary. It could be based on style or copying others. Here, though, we had a specific reason why we were pulling apart the volumes and separating them. Multiple reasons. The first was that the homeowner was an avid bird watcher, and we wanted to be able to weave the house around these existing mature trees that were on site so that she could actually bird watch from her house, where she didn't have to go out and go on a hike or go into the mountains or go into a marshland area on the Cape. She wanted to be able to have that experience of bird watching from her house. So stretching and pulling the volumes of the house apart and moving them, shifting them around the trees rather than just clear cutting the trees and plopping a house down, that was a strategic maneuver. The homeowner also was very experienced in creating pottery, and that was one thing that she loved doing, both as a hobby and also as a little bit of income where she would sell the pieces. And her favorite type of pottery to create was the kintsugi pottery, where a vase or an object would be broken apart or something would be broken accidentally, and then the act of reconnecting it became part of the art itself. And so as we were thinking about this house and thinking about how we would connect these volumes, we thought of the house almost as a kintsugi piece of pottery, and that these connectors would bring the house together. And as an added layer to extend that metaphor into something that's personal for her, her late husband was a steel worker. So our thought was that these kintsugi connectors could be framed out of exposed structural steel. And then as she moves through her house on a day-to-day basis, that it would be a moment for her to remember her husband. And these design decisions, pulling the house apart so she could watch the bird, connecting the volumes together to represent her pottery and as a tribute to her late husband, that added to the soul of the design. And it was going to be something that was really special. But sometimes things get too big. Sometimes a gesture or a moment gets repeated. And that's a problem that we were running into in these early conceptual stages. Now, if the project would have went forward, we would have worked this out. But this was something that was on my mind where if you pull apart every volume and connect every volume with this kintsugi husband tribute steel framed moment, then if every space has that same condition, then the condition loses its strength, it loses its meaning. So one of the things that we were talking about is not only reducing the size of the project, but also reducing the moments where we would have these kintsugi connector pieces. And I think that really would have helped the design. As a recap, where we were before is we had essentially 3 volumes that made almost like a extended sort of offset H shape. On the northern side, we had 3 volumes. And moving from west to east, we first had the garage, and then the guest suites where the client's daughter and granddaughter would stay, and also separate areas for guests that were extended family or friends. Then we would have the primary suite to the far east to capture the views. To the southern side, we would have sort of the middle part of the H would be the kitchen and dining room that would lead you around and extend you back out to the living room. The kitchen and dining would be separated by one of those connector pieces, but then in between the sort of garage bedroom volume and the kitchen volume and then the living room volume that came out, the main entry for the house would rest in there. And then again, it would be accessed by one of these steel and glass connector pieces. Moving down from there, we were going to bring a stair out of the south side of the living room and then wrap down and around to underneath the deck. And that underneath the deck could be a covered patio area. And the pottery studio could also be down there. One of the things that we talked about is having the pottery studio on the lower level might be nice because she could have ocean views from her pottery studio, and that would be a really nice experience. But the act of getting materials and supplies down there could be challenging because it's not only a long distance from the driveway garage area, but it's also a sloping site. So we would have had to work in some sort of access road around the northern edge of the property so that she could maybe drive a vehicle down there and unload the pottery materials and then drive back up. And that might have been a little bit challenging. When we're in those early conceptual stages, no idea is a bad idea, so we like to explore just about everything. Moving on from there, we were not going to drastically change the orientation of these spaces. We were still going to have the garage and the bedroom suites to the north and the kitchen, dining, and living down to the south with the entry in between. But we thought that, number one, the pottery studio could be part of the garage. You know, you don't have to have an ocean view from every space that you're in. And if you have an ocean view from every space, that might diminish how special the ocean view is. So the pottery studio could be its own separate volume accessed right from the garage. The guest bedrooms and the primary bedrooms could be under one separate volume instead of splitting those apart. And then the kitchen and living room could be its own volume, possibly with a connector piece. And so this reduced the square footage, this reduced the having things on multi-levels, and this reduced cutting into the slope of the site even more with a retaining wall and building spaces down below that would have added to the cost of the foundation work. Instead, now everything can stay on one level, and the only really downside is going from the house to the dock becomes a longer experience in traversing down that slope rather than sort of going from the living room deck area down to another level and then down from there where you have moments of rest. It would be sort of all an exterior movement going down that slope. But this is where landscape architecture can come in, and we can really design that movement from the house to the dock, and we can design outdoor areas, these little moments, these little pockets of spaces as we move from the house to the dock that could be really special. And so when you look at the overall formal gesture of what we're doing now, you have these these two clear volumes with an entry in the middle, and then a couple of moments where they're pulled apart. By only having a couple of these moments, I think that adds to how important that moment is, rather than having that same thing all over the place. And so when you look at this site plan now, and when you look at this basic volume study, you can see that as the design gets refined, it gets simplified, it gets clarified, and I think that we're going in the right direction. And so as I work through the design on this project and take you along for the ride, this is not a project that's going to get built anymore, but I think that it's still a special design, and it's still something that's been with me for over a year now that I've been thinking about. As someone who likes to design and likes to create these spaces, I sort of just need to flush it out and complete at least the schematic design work. So we'll see where the design goes in these next series of videos, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks.